Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Xander Elliott. I'm the content editor at The National. I've been joined by Craig Dalzell. What role are you in now in Common Weal think tank?
I am the head of policy and research at Common Weal. And if I can just say, week at Common Weal, because it's our 10th birthday this week. So we're all very excited. Check out our website. We've got a bunch of stuff over there celebrating.
Yeah, congratulations, 10 years. And you have been, as we've reported on previously, we've spoken about previously, you have been producing reports on council tax reform and how it could look in future, maybe even in an independent Scotland, how it could look under devolved powers now, what could happen if the Scottish Government had more. So why have you been doing that work? Let's start at the very basics. Like, why does council tax in Scotland need reform?
It's probably about the most broken tax we have in Scotland. The fundamental principle of the tax is it is based on what your house was valued at in 1991. I mean, imagine if our income tax was based on what our salary was in 1991. It would just be so ludicrous you wouldn't do it. It's even ludicrous that we're still talking about what is the case for reforming council tax. We won that argument 20 odd years ago. And we won the argument about, is it now time to replace it about 10 years ago? But we're still here. We're still talking about it. We're just desperately waiting for the Scottish Government to do it.
Yeah, we hear always, well, I say always, I mean a lot in this series that the National's been running about council tax reform this week, that a lot of properties, as you say, they're valued on their 1991 values. So a lot of properties are now in their wrong band. Is that something that you've seen?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, if you think about a fairly typical Band A house, you're talking about a house somewhere valued something around £50,000-70,000, something like that. But I've seen properties are worth about £70,000 on the market that are Band D houses. Similarly, I've also seen houses that are worth £500,000 in Band D. So there are houses at both ends of the spectrum, just in the completely wrong band. And it means that people in very large houses are getting quite a good deal out of this broken tax. But much more critically, you've got people struggling to pay a council tax that they really shouldn't be paying because their house just happens to be a bit older, and it's ended up in this weird place in the banding system.
Yeah, it feels like the banding system doesn't quite have enough flexibility, especially at the top end. I mean, it only goes up to G. But if people are in multi-million pound houses, is that a source of income that we're missing out on, not reforming it?
Well, look at it this way: if you were earning 10 times as much as I was, then you would expect your income tax to be at least 10 times as much as mine. We have a proportional income tax system, so you'd actually be paying more than 10 times what I would pay in income tax in that respect. But if you take that example of a £70,000 Band A house, your council tax is probably about £850 a year. If you've got a £700,000 house in Band H, you're only paying just over £3,000 a year, 3.5 times as much. If you have a £7 million house, 100 times the value of that Band A house, you're still only paying 3.5 times as much council tax. Yeah. It's a ludicrous situation.
So we've heard options put forward of trying to target that wealth. Is that something that you think would be possible with council tax reform?
Well, we are no longer arguing for reform of council tax. So you can talk about things like revaluing the bands. We've seen the Scottish Government in the last year talk about maybe tweaking the ratios of the bands, so people in Band G and H pay a little bit more. You can talk about something a bit more radical, like revaluing every house in Scotland. Wales did this 15 years ago now. And get everything in the correct band. But even if you get all the houses in the correct band, you still have this fundamental problem of, yeah, you're right, the council tax just doesn't scale properly. So we're advocating get rid of the banding system altogether and replace it with a property tax that taxes the present value of the house as a percentage.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the case of Wales. It does seem like that's not really a permanent fix. I mean, if we're talking about how ludicrous it is that we're all paying council tax based on the 1991 value of our house, it's not really a fix to start paying council tax based on the 2009 value of our house. It's more just a slight update of a broken system. So how could we do it better? I mean, you said by the value of your house, but how do you know the value of your house unless you've sold it?
Well, this is how you do it. This is how countries that have this kind of tax, like Denmark, Estonia, they have this kind of tax, and you have periodic updates. You can take a pretty good guess at what your house is worth right now. Plenty of property real estate websites have algorithmic measures based on the rough price of what similar houses are selling in your area. You can see what your house is worth roughly, and a lot of estate agents have various other more detailed methods of doing this, so you can get a rough baseline of what your house is worth. And then when you buy or sell the house, that price gets updated. If you do any major improvements, anything that would require a building warrant or or planning permission, through the process of that, you should get a revaluation on your house after the work is completed. And like places like Denmark, we should have a regular national update of pricing. Denmark just went through theirs this year. You could do it every 5 years or so. We used to do this. The system that we had before council tax, the old rates system, used to do this every 5 years or so. You would update the value of every house in the country.
So why did we stop?
Council tax was well, we brought in the poll tax, basically. Thatcher brought in the poll tax, and that caused the historic protests against it, which brought down that system, and incidentally, as collateral, also brought down our regional government system. But the replacement for it, for the poll tax, was the council tax, and it was brought in as a absolute minimum possible change. Okay, we won't tax every house in the same band. We'll have 5 bands instead, or whatever. So and it was supposed to be a temporary system until a better one was worked out, but we just kept it for a third of a century.
Yeah, like you say, an absolute minimum change. And I mean, it's not like we in Scotland haven't been hearing about the need for change. Alex Salmond's SNP, before they even took power in 2007, were pledging a reform of council tax. That was obviously 17 years ago now. Yeah. So why do you think that we haven't seen any real movement on it? Why are we still stuck with this absolute minimum change from a tax that was just, as you said, so widely hated? It brought down the entire government system.
Well, there was quite a good reason why the 2007 scheme didn't work. The SNP's policy at the time was to replace the property tax with a local income tax. Now, the problem with a local income tax is it doesn't capture the wealth that comes when your property price goes up. It would take, for example, very asset-rich people who are maybe a bit more income poor or just didn't need the income out of the tax system while still maintaining the value of this escalating property. There was also technical reasons where, under the devolution system at the time, had Scotland scrapped the council tax and replaced it with the local income tax, it would have taken us out of the system of council tax exemptions, like if you live alone or if you have other exemptions and discounts on your council tax. That would have caused Westminster to cut a substantial chunk from the block grant that was calculated based on the exemptions paid to people living alone in England on their council tax. So those issues, plus just generally, it was a minority parliament and there was no consensus for that specific change. It just didn't happen. But it also killed any momentum on a better replacement coming in.
Do you think that now, 17 years down the line, we do have more of a consensus on what a replacement for council tax could look like?
We still have a fair bit of debate around what to replace it with, and that is still an issue. I know we'll get onto things like land taxation in a wee bit, and that's part of the issue is capturing that wealth as well. So there should still be an active debate. However, I should say, I mean, I've spoken at SNP, Green and Labour conferences on the issue of replacing council tax with our property tax system, and you talk to people there, and they're all saying, well, this scheme makes sense. We need the change. Why not this? Or what? At least if we can't take that one, at least can we come up with something better? There's an appetite for change, if not necessarily the political conversations going on between the parties that would help that come through.
Yeah, it feels like the political conversations, the ideas would come forward a lot more rapidly, be taken more seriously, if there was the idea that this is actively happening. Council tax is being scrapped. We are replacing it with something. Let's have a conversation about what we're replacing it with, rather than we'll lay out opposition and council tax in future, which is just all we're hearing. So, Craig, just from a Common Weal perspective, then, I know that you have produced papers and things like that on what a replacement council tax could look like. Could you outline just your proposals, really, for one?
Yeah. So our proposal for council tax is to get rid of the bands and bring in a tax based on the percentage of the present value of your house. Now, we argued, we calculated back in 2021 that if you took 2020 house prices at the time, a rate that is annoyingly academic of 0.63% of whatever your house is worth right now would result in a council tax or a property tax revenue that was revenue neutral, that was equal to what the council tax brought in at that time. To put that in proper numbers, if you had a £100,000 house, then your property tax would be £630 a year. If you had a £70,000 house in Band A that is currently paying £850 the council tax, you'd actually, under our system, be paying more like £440. And we found that, I mentioned those bigger houses, £700,000 house would be paying £4,500. The £7 million house would be paying £44,000 a year in property tax under our system, which is how it remains revenue neutral. You'd have the people in the really, really big houses paying a substantially larger sum for that privilege. The break-even point we found is actually something like, it's difficult to say because of the misbanding issues, but something like a house worth about £400,000 in Band G would pay about the same as they currently do in council tax under our system. So that means about 80% of households in Scotland would get a tax cut.
I mean, that's one way that you could probably pitch it to the public and have it come across as extremely popular. Because I was just doing some quick numbers here, and £630 per 100 grand. But I guess there is an issue for these people if they've been living in the same house or the same flat in an area and for decades and decades and decades, and they've kind of found it getting gentrified around them, like a flat that they maybe even paid their mortgage on, and they've owned for the last 30 years, and they wanted to retire into. They find themselves lumbered with a 250 grand value flat that they just can't afford to pay that council tax on. What would you do about those people that are maybe asset rich but cash poor?
Now that it's difficult to find out how many people that would actually affect. I believe the numbers are probably going to be lower than the PR might suggest, but it is a problem worth tackling. First up, we would phase the system in, and this is something the Greens actually proposed. The Green Party proposed a number of years ago when they were looking at property tax reforms. You could have both taxes phase in over 5 years, say. So you would pay, in year 2, you would pay 80% in your council tax bill and then 20% in the property tax, and they would just sort of ramp up and pass each other. And that would give people time to sort of adjust their finances and be able to afford things. The other way of doing it...
complicated that this year.
It would be.
Of my council tax.
I mean, it would be a bit rough for those 5 years. But to be honest, most of the calculations would be at the council end. they just update your direct debit and let you know what it's changing to. Other ways you can do it is via that system of exemption. So if it is someone who has stayed in that house for a period of time, you can come up with schemes. You could even, in extremis, you could come up with a scheme of capping the tax paid a percentage of your income, turn it into a quasi-income tax until that person moves the house. Have them grandfathered into the old system to a certain degree, but once they're no longer in that house, the new buyer of the house has to come in with their eyes open of this is what the property tax would be on that property at that value.
Yeah. And in terms of a land tax, then it's something we hear a lot of talk about among progressives asking the government to explore new areas. Like, could that work at a local authority level? Could that be brought in as at the same time as a kind of replacement on council tax, or would that not work?
We actually advocate that the two taxes should be the same. The property tax and the land tax should be the same tax. Now, you could have a separate land tax, but one of the things we worry about is the big estate owners then using that to lobby to keep their land tax bill down and pass the subsidy on to the property tax owners, like us who don't own land. We just think that land and property should be the same. The other reason for that is right now your council tax is already charged based on the value of the land under your house. You know, some people decry a land tax as a garden tax. That was something that happened to Jeremy Corbyn, and he wasn't able to explain his way out of it. But your council tax already taxes your garden. What it doesn't do is tax the shooting estate you own up in the hill. I'm making assumptions about your property portfolio, Sander.
That'd be lovely.
So what we would do is just take that property tax and extend it to the shooting estate. And as for the local aspect, that's probably the only way to do it. Under the current settlement, the Scottish Government has very limited powers to introduce a new national tax, especially if it doesn't have the permission from Westminster to do it. But the Scotland Act explicitly allows local taxes to be introduced so long as the revenue for those taxes funds local services. So as long as the money doesn't go to Holyrood, as long as the money stays in the local authority, you know, we can create as many taxes as we like. And we're seeing this with things like the tourist levy. That came under that principle.
And presumably, if the national government in Edinburgh were to bring in this new council tax, as you're suggesting, like something like a 0.63% on property, they would also be able to give councils the power to change that slightly, tweak it around the edges so it fits what their local situations are.
Absolutely, and that for us is a big key principle of local democracy, that councils should have as free rein as possible to adjust those numbers themselves. The 0.63% is a sort of academic number to show you the kind of scale of where you need to be to keep finances stable. Denmark has a system where councils are allowed to adjust their own number within a band. And in fact, when I say councils in Denmark, I don't mean like their regional authorities, what we would call local authorities. I mean their municipal councils. It wouldn't be South Lanarkshire, where I am, that would control the property tax on my area. It could be my village council that controls it. Various other countries have something similar. They tend to keep these property and especially the land taxes as local as they can be. But yeah, while technically the Scottish Government could bring in a law saying no, you will all abide by the same national rate, or they could do with what they do with the council tax, which is bully and bribe councils into maintaining council tax freezes whenever they want. That's bad politics. It's terrible for democracy. Don't do it just because it's possible. But yeah, these should be local taxes funding local services, and they should be controlled locally.
Yeah, whether or not it should be like proper community council level, because at that point, I feel like we want people that are controlling the council taxes to at least have some expertise and experience. I think once you get down to that local level, it's who even votes for their parish council. So, but yeah, as you say, there's a huge amount.
That's something. Who votes for their community council right now? Not very many people, because the community council doesn't have any power. Now, if the community council had the power to change your property tax, you probably want someone on that board who is quite well up in being able to do that, and you probably want them to stand for election. And if you can't see them, maybe it's you.
Yeah. Well, they know I find myself in control of property taxes, and no. But just before we let you go, Craig, because time's been running away with us, we've just got one question that's come in. Can you foresee people with unused residential land? They might build attractive or unattractive assets on the land in order to modify the tax they pay. That seems like a valid point. So if it's just sitting vacant at the moment, maybe people would want to somehow devalue the land so that the tax they pay is a lot lower.
Oh, I had a more extreme version of that when I was talking about the land tax for estates, where some laird might do something that reduces they declare that their land is only worth £1. Well, the solution to that is to give communities the compulsory right to purchase. If the estate is only worth £1, well, here's your £1, it's ours now.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely seems like it would stop a pound, but yeah, would it also stop development? Would people not want to maybe expand their houses or develop a new residential plot because they'll find the taxes going up so much? Or do you think it wouldn't really impact on that kind of thing?
It tends not to in other countries. I think basically the big thing that's going for it is so many properties are getting, relatively speaking, overcharged by the council tax. So if I'm talking about that £70,000 house again, its council tax drops from 850 down to 450. Well, that then gives you the scope. Oh, well, I could put improvements. Maybe I could put a conservatory on it. I'd still be saving money compared to the old system. I could almost double the value of my house, and I wouldn't be paying more tax than I used to. So I think it might actually encourage development, especially for people in that transition where they see, well, now I can actually afford to think about those improvements.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right, Craig, we will let you go because, as I said, time's really run away with us. I wasn't expecting to go over 20 minutes, but thank you so much for your time and for explaining the problems with council tax and one possible replacement for it. Hopefully, we will see the Scottish Government move on this. But okay, one more question.
Yeah.
It's 2024. The election is in 18 months. Is it too late for this Parliament?
This Parliament, probably. I mean, we were actually supposed to. I mean, in 2021, the SNP had a manifesto promise to have a citizens' assembly on local government and local government finance reform. And while they haven't formally cancelled that policy, we've had 2 First Ministers since it was last mentioned in any sort of official dispatch, and it's now pretty much too late to have one. So I think it is gone. I would really like to see some official statement to that respect. Why are we not getting our Citizens' Assembly? It is getting a bit late in the day to introduce brand new primary legislation, especially if it doesn't appear in this budget. So all eyes on the budget in December to see if that appears. If not, then we probably will be looking at the 2026 election. And speaking for myself, I'll be very, very interested in the parties that do come up with a concrete proposal on reform.
Fantastic. Well, we really will let you go now, Craig. Thank you so much for your time. It was really enlightening to speak to you. As I said, about council tax, why it needs replacing, how we could possibly replace it. Will the Scottish Government replace it anytime soon? This is the penultimate day in the National's council tax series, Axing the Tax. Tomorrow is the final day. So you can see everything we've done so far on the national.scot, and in tomorrow's paper will be the final articles, the close of the series on Axing the Tax. So thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon, and find everything else on the national.scot. Thanks very much.
Thank you.